I have a confession. I write horror films myself, but I can't watch them. It all goes back to the day in the theater where I went to watch Conjuring 2. I know, not even the original one. But there is a scene in that film where Valak, the nun, steps out from the shadows beside a television. Everyone in the room leaned back as they should, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something else. Legs dangling right next to me. These people behind me, probably a couple, I don't know, had stretched out, getting cozy. I screamed the shit out of my life that day, using all the slangs in my vocabulary that I had. It was probably the worst experience I had watching a film. But if we go outside of that personal horror and look at it in a macro lens, we understand a thing about horror films and horror in general. Fear isn't an invention of horror films. It's one of the oldest survival tools we have. Long before we built cities, long before we had languages, fear kept us alive. Rustle in the grass, freeze, heart rate spiking, eyes dilating, you know you're ready to run. Scientists call this the amygdala hijack. It's the part of your brain that reacts before you even think. You don't decide to be scared, you just are. Your brain reacts to the sound, light, and the movement the same way it would do to a predator in the wild. That's why horror feels so raw. It's like a pre-civilization alarm system that still rules our body. But here's the genius. Horror filmmakers don't just trigger fear, they choreograph it. They turn this biological trait into cinema. If horror is a science, then sound is the most powerful experiment done. Let's start with the basics. Human hearing typically range from about 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz, but horror sound designers know that the most unsettling tones live right at the edge of the spectrum. So below 20 Hz would be infrasound. We don't consciously hear it, but we feel it in our chest, in our stomach, in our heartbeat. Infrasound vibrations mimic the tremors of earthquake, storms, even the growl of a predator, if you will. Your body reacts with unease before your mind knows why. Many haunted house attractions pipe infrasound through subwoofers just to create that uncanny dread. And in the other side of the spectrum, above 15,000 Hz, you have piercing frequencies. Think of violin screech in Psycho or sudden metallic shrills. Our ears are hypersensitive to those because in nature, sharp cries often signal danger. That's the biology, but in a theater, sound is a spatial experience. That's where Dolby 5.1, 7.1, and Atmos systems matter. In a standard 5.1 setup, you have speakers in front, which is center, left, and right. You have surround speakers behind. In 7.1, you add rear channels and subwoofers for depth. Atmos now takes it one step further. Overhead speakers that literally drop sounds from above. For horror, this is an absolute gift. The placement of these speakers let filmmakers direct fear inside the room itself. Think about the scene in The Conjuring. When clapping comes from the corner of the house, in Dolby Atmos, that clap doesn't just play at you, it plays around you. The boundary between screen and space dissolves, and then there is silence. The total absence of sound makes you lean forward, anticipating, if you will. It's the equivalent of negative space in an image. Your brain fills the void with dread.
What is it?
And when the fear finally arrives, your nervous system is already exploding. So when we talk about horror, we can't just talk about story or images. The architecture of theater itself, the speaker placement, the frequencies you can't even hear, is part of the scare. If sound is the unseen hand that tightens our chest, the frame is the visible cage. Every shot in a horror film is a negotiation between what you see and what you don't. Filmmakers understand something simple about our brains where you place the subject in the frame changes how we anticipate danger. Centered framing feels safe. When the character is dead center, our eyes relax, as if they belong there. But shift them slightly off center to the right or to the left, and suddenly the empty space starts to breathe. Your brain starts scanning the whole frame, asking, what's coming? What's missing? Horror directors love that tension. Place the protagonist on the right third of the frame and leave the left side empty, and your subconscious begs for something to appear. And there's a neurocinematic logic to that. For audiences who read and write from left to right, let's say Latin, Sanskrit speakers, Western language speakers, our eyes are trained to move that way. When that natural order is disrupted, we feel something's off. A blank space, especially on the left, paired with dissonant sound, feels wrong. Like the sentence that never finishes, if you will. For audiences who read from right to left, let's say Persian audience or Arabic audience, the inverse holds. The brain reacts to spatial imbalance based on the learned directionality. Cinematographers weaponize depth too. Long doorways behind characters, shadows that might hold a figure or might not. Our eyes are hunters. We're built to scan for movement in the periphery. A horror frame is never static. It's like a puzzle we're decoding. And editing pushes to a next level. Mainstream cuts are built for comfort, continuity, rhythm, clarity. But horror breaks it and throws it à la poubelle. It lingers too long or cuts too soon. The editing itself becomes a shock, if you will. Because horror isn't about what you see, it's about what you expect to see. Think of Jaws. For half of the film, you never see the shark. You just see water. Your imagination fills with teeth. That's the genius of horror framing. It turns negative space into a weapon. You're trapped inside the rectangle, if you will, scanning each inch for the thing that might kill you. And when sound and frame sync, your sense collides, fear becomes total. But the image isn't just about where to hide the monster, it's about how to make it feel real. If sound primes you and the frame traps you, practical effects make the trap real. Horror lives and dies on tangibility. The audience has to believe the things on screen could touch them, could hurt them in a way, and practical effects, not CGI, are the fastest way of convincing your brain that it's real. Your eyes are evolved to read texture, weight, and how light hits surface. A rubber mask under real light feels more alive than the cleanest digital render. When blood actually spatters, your brain buys it. That's why so many horror classics still rely on physical craft. The alien chestburster wasn't pixels. It was an animatronic rig bursting through latex. The actor's scream was real. And in the film, the thing turned puppetry and prosthetics into body horror art. Light loves real surfaces. When a prosthetic is lit with the same key as the actor, the shadow blends naturally. That's why latex and fake blood age better than most digital monsters. And practical horror isn't just gore, it's presence. A door cracking open, a shadow that lingers, dust stirred by something unseen. These small physical details sell the illusion more than any digital spectacle. Even sound design is physical. Foley artists snap celery for bone, squish sponges for gore. That tactically grounds what you hear in the real world, and practical effects just don't fool the audience, they fool the actors. Give them a creature to look at, to scream at, and the fear becomes contagious. The camera captures that. Suddenly horror doesn't feel staged, it feels alive. That's the paradox. Horror film scares us with fake things that feel more real than reality. And when you combine them with subsonic sound and the empty corners of the frame, horror stops being just a film. It becomes an experience, if you will, that crawls under the skin. But all of this, the sound, the frame, the blood, leads to a bigger question. Why do we want this? Why we keep returning to fear? Horror at best is a metaphor. It externalizes the things that we struggle to name. The Babadook isn't just about a monster, it's about grief, about how loss lingers and takes shape in our lives. Get Out isn't just a thriller, it's an autopsy of racism wrapped in genre form. Fear in cinema becomes a language. It allows us to comfort what we'd rather suppress. And then there's what happens in the theater itself. Fear spreads. If one person jumps, the whole row feels it. Psychologists call this the emotional contagion. We sync with each other's reactions. Horror filmmakers know this. A perfect timed scare doesn't just hit you, it ripples through the room, amplifying itself. Watching horror alone at home is one experience, but watching it peaks in cinema, it is completely a different entity altogether, a group of nervous systems sparkling together, if you will. But maybe the most fascinating part is what horror does to us afterwards. Neuroscientists talks about the resilience training. Exposing ourselves to fear in safe conditions strengthens the nervous system. We rehearse panic in a way, we rehearse recovery. It's a practice for the unpredictable chaos of life. If psychology explains why fear works on an individual, culture explains why certain fears dominate at certain times. Horror films aren't made in a vacuum. They are time capsules of collective anxiety. Take the 50s. The monster, then giant insect, radioactive creatures, aliens were metaphors of the atomic bomb and the paranoia of the Cold War. Fear of annihilation was everywhere and cinema gave it form. Now jump to 1970s and horror got more intimate. Films like The Exorcist dealt with the collapse of traditional authority, religion, family, suburban safety, etc. People weren't scared of the other invading from outside anymore. They were scared of rot within. By the 2000s, after 9/11, horror became about the collapse of security itself. Torture porn, if you will, like Saw, and mirrored a culture obsessed with terror, surveillance, and body under duress. Zombies returned not just as monsters but as symbols of mindless consumption, of pandemics, of systems breaking down. And today's horror feels split. On one hand, there is wave of prestige horror, films like Or The Witch, that externalizes mental health, grief, generational trauma. On the other hand, streaming services churn out fast scares engineered for the algorithm, if you will, designed for the distracted viewer watching half on their phone. Horror always lashes onto whatever is bubbling under the surface of society. It turns headlines into nightmares. It translates cultural unease into visceral experiences, if you will. And that's the thing. Horror isn't just entertainment. It's a seismograph. It picks up tremors before they're obvious. So why do we keep letting horror get to us? Why do we sit in dark rooms willingly handing over our nervous systems to filmmakers who want nothing more to do but to make us scream? Maybe because horror is the most honest genre we have. Comedy can be clever, drama can be moving, action can be exciting, but horror? It cuts straight to the body. It bypasses your rational mind and taps into something primal, fear of the unknown, fear of death itself. And in that sense, horror is universal. A jump scare in Tokyo works the same in, let's say, Paris. A shadow behind a door doesn't need subtitles. The heartbeat you feel during The Exorcist, Hereditary, or The Conjuring, if you will, that's cinema at its most direct. But beyond the scream, horror is also a practice. It's rehearsal. Every time we watch, we confront with the things we don't want to face in real life: loss, pain, mortality, and we have to do it in a safe space. So we do it in a safe space. The lights come back on, the credits roll, we walk out shaken but alive. That's why it hacks our brain, and that's why we keep coming back to these horror films.